Mr. Small was very small. He lived in a small house underneath a daisy at the bottom of Mr. Robinson's garden. It was a very nice house, although very tiny, and it suited Mr. Small very well indeed. He liked living there. Now, this story is all about the time Mr. Small decided to get a job. The trouble was, what sort of a job could Mr. Small do? After all, there aren't that many small jobs. Mr. Small had thought about it for a long time, but hadn't had any ideas, not one. He was thinking about it now, while he was having lunch. He was having half a pea, 1 crumb, and a drop of lemonade. Mr. Small thought and thought while he was eating his big lunch, but it was no use. Thinking just made him thirsty. So he had another drop of lemonade. I know, he thought to himself. After lunch, I'll go and see Mr. Robinson and ask his advice. So after lunch, he left his house and walked to Mr. Robinson's house at the top of the garden. It was quite a long walk for somebody as small as Mr. Small, and halfway there he stopped for a rest. He sat on a pebble, feeling quite out of breath. A worm crawled by and stopped. "Good afternoon, Mr. Small," said the worm. "Good afternoon, Walter," said Mr. Small to the worm, whom he knew quite well. "Out for a walk, are you?" asked Walter. "Going to see Mr. Robinson," replied Mr. Small. "Oh," said Walter the worm, and crawled off. Walter was a worm of very few words. After he'd rested for a while, Mr. Small set off again and walked all the rest of the way to Mr. Robinson's house without stopping once. When he got there, he climbed up the steps to Mr. Robinson's back door. He knocked at the door. Nobody heard him. The trouble was, you see, that if you're as small as Mr. Small, you don't have a very loud knock. Mr. Small looked up. There, high above his head, was a doorbell. "How can I ring the bell when I can't reach it?" thought Mr. Small to himself. Just then, Mr. Small heard footsteps. It was the postman. The postman came to the door, posted his letters, and was just about to leave when he heard a voice. "Hello," said the voice. The postman looked down. "Hello," he said to Mr. Small. "Who are you?" "I'm Mr. Small," said Mr. Small. "Will you ring the bell for me?" "Of course I will," replied the postman in answer to Mr. Small's question. And reaching out, he pressed the bell with his finger. "Thank you," said Mr. Small. "My pleasure," said the postman, and off he went. Mr. Small heard footsteps coming to the door. The door opened. Mr. Robinson looked out. "That's funny," he said. "I'm sure I heard somebody ring the bell." He was about to shut the door when he heard a little voice. "Hello," said the voice. "Hello, Mr. Robinson." Mr. Robinson looked down and down. "Hello," he said. "What are you doing here?" "I've come to ask your advice," said Mr. Small to Mr. Robinson. "Well," said Mr. Robinson, "you'd better come in, have a talk." Mr. Small followed Mr. Robinson into the house, and, perched on the arm of Mr. Robinson's favourite chair, he told him how he couldn't think of a job that he could do. Mr. Robinson sipped a cup of tea and listened. "So you see," Mr. Small explained, "how difficult it is." "Yes, yes, I can see that," said Mr. Robinson. "But leave it to me." Mr. Robinson knew a lot of people. Mr. Robinson knew somebody who worked in a restaurant and arranged for Mr. Small to work there, putting mustard into mustard pots. But Mr. Small kept falling into the pots and getting covered in mustard, so he left that job. Mr. Robinson knew somebody who worked in a sweet shop and arranged for Mr. Small to work there, serving sweets. But Mr. Small kept falling into the sweet jars, so he left that job. Mr. Robinson knew somebody who worked in a place where they made matches and arranged for Mr. Small to work there, packing matches into boxes. But Mr. Small kept getting shut in the boxes with the matches, so he left that job. Mr. Robinson knew somebody who worked on a farm and arranged for Mr. Small to work there, sorting out the brown eggs from the white eggs. But Mr. Small kept getting trapped by the eggs, so he left that job. "What are we going to do with you?" Mr. Robinson asked Mr. Small one evening. "Don't know," said Mr. Small in a small voice. "I've got one more idea," said Mr. Robinson. "I know somebody who writes stories for children. Perhaps you could work for him." So the following day, Mr. Robinson took Mr. Small to meet the man who wrote children's stories. "Can I work for you?" Mr. Small asked the man. "Yes, you can," replied the man. "Pass me that pencil and tell me all about the jobs you've been doing. And then I'll write a story about it. I'll call it Mr. Small," he added. "But children won't want to hear a story all about me," exclaimed Mr. Small. "Yes, they will," replied the man. "They'll like it very much. And you did, didn't you?"
Nobody knew she lived there. Nobody noticed her, not even the farmer and his wife. So there she lived, all alone. She was rather lonely and rather sad.
Oh dear, I wish I had someone to talk to.
One day, she was feeling so lonely she decided to be very brave and go out for a walk.
Come on, Tiny, best foot forward.
Out of a mouse hole she came. She crept across the dining room, and then she pushed the door open and crept into the hall. Now, to little Miss Tiny, the hall looked as big as a field.
Oh my goodness.
And she scuttled across it to the back door of the farm. Luckily for her, there was a cat flap at the bottom of the door, and she squeezed herself through it onto the doorstep. It was all very exciting. There before her was the vast expanse of the farmyard, so she set out to explore it. As little Miss Tiny walked across the yard, she came upon a hole. Suddenly, up popped a worm. "Morning! Seen any birds about?"
Oh, my shivering shoes, it's a monster.
Little Miss Tiny was terrified. She ran across the farmyard to hide, and she came to a door with a gap at the bottom and ducked in underneath. There inside was a pig. A large pig. And if you're as small as little Miss Tiny, a large pig looks very large indeed. Miss Tiny looked at the pig, and the pig looked at Miss Tiny. He grunted and moved closer to inspect this little person who'd entered his sty.
Oh, my trembling toes.
Miss Tiny shot out of the pigsty as fast as her little legs would carry her, which wasn't very fast because her legs were so very little. She stopped to catch her breath.
Oh, my knocking knees.
When she recovered her breath, she climbed up on a large stone to see if the pig had followed her. Fortunately, it hadn't.
Well, thank goodness for that.
But suddenly, the stone began to move.
Oh, chattering teeth, what's happening now?
"Fierce, please! Move right along the bus, please!" But it was only a harmless old snail. Little Miss Tiny jumped down and ran across the farmyard. She ran right down the back of the pigsty before she stopped. She leaned against the wall and put her hands over her eyes. And suddenly, she heard a noise. A very close noise. A sort of breathing noise. Very close indeed.
What's that?
She hardly dared take her hands away from her eyes, but when she did, she wished she hadn't. What do you think it was? There, right in front of her, looking at her with green eyes, Ginger, the farm cat. Oh, poor little Miss Tiny. Ginger grinned, showing his teeth.
Help! Oh, it's a lion! Please, somebody help!
Little Miss Tiny shouted at the top of her voice. The trouble was, the top of little Miss Tiny's voice was not very loud. Ginger grinned another grin. Every day, Mr. Strong went to Home Farm to buy some eggs. He liked eggs, lots of them. And that particular day, he was walking home across the farmyard when he heard a very tiny squeak. Now, what was that? There it was again. It was coming from round the corner. He looked round the corner and he saw that Ginger had trapped poor little Miss Tiny.
Help! Oh, help! Please help!
Shoo, come on now, go away, cat. Mr. Strong picked up little Miss Tiny very gently. Hello. Who are you?
I'm Miss Tiny.
Yes, well, you are, aren't you? Well, if I was as tiny as you, I wouldn't go wandering around large farmyards.
But I'm so lonely. I wanted to find someone to talk to.
Oh, dear. Well, now, let's see if we can't find you some friends to talk to.
Thank you very much. That's very kind of you.
And now, every day, Mr. Strong collects little Miss Tiny and takes her off to see her friends. 3 days ago, he took her to see Mr. Funny, who told her so many jokes that she just couldn't stop laughing all day. and then, a couple of days ago, he took her to see Mr. Greedy, who told her what he usually had for his favourite breakfast. Toast, 2 slices, cornflakes, 1 whole packet, milk, 1 bottle, sugar, 1 bowlful, toast, 3 slices, eggs 3, boiled, of course, soft, toast 4 slices, butter 1 dishful, marmalade 1 pot.
That's much too much for tiny little me. I couldn't possibly eat all that.
Well, for you, divide by 100. Yesterday, Mr. Strong took her to see Mr. Silly, and Mr. Silly showed her how to stand on her head.
That's very silly.
Oh, yes, well, thank you. And guess who she met today? Somebody who's become a special little friend. Mr. Small. I never thought I'd ever meet anybody smaller than myself.
Just you wait till I grow up.
Oh, I think... Oh, jolly good. Oh, fine.
She's plump.
He's fun. They're late. And naughty. Trickle.
She's trouble.
I'm shy.
We're helpful,
Tiny.
I'm silly.
She's little Miss Sunshine.
I'm fuzzy. I'm greedy.
I'm